listening to Radio Sputnik. Telling the untold.
And we are live from America and just outside the Matrix. It is time once again for the show that brings you the truth. And sometimes there's a lot of it behind the headlines, and sometimes it's very far behind the headlines. I'm investigative journalist Lee Stranahan, and this is The Backstory. So our intrepid producer, Rod, has once again put together a great show today. Mark Sloboda will be joining us straight out of wherever the hell he is in Russia. He was in Crimea last time. I'd like to say straight out of Moscow, because that was my favorite NWA album, but I don't know where he is. Rod, do you have any idea where Mark Sloboda is today?
I believe he's back in Moscow.
Okay, so we'll find out. But he's somewhere in Russia. He's not like hiding behind a palm tree in Tahiti or anything, correct?
No, I don't think so. I think he's still kind of cold, but not that warm yet.
By the way, it's like 49 degrees here in Sioux Falls, South Dakota. So, of course, I caught some rays. I didn't catch some rays, but I did take the garbage out because it was fairly cold over the weekend, although we had the 3-day weekend. It's good to be back. Did you have a nice weekend, by the way, Rod?
Yeah, it was cold and snowing and all that, but besides that, it was all good.
Well, you, by the way, as you know, are Rod from Philly, and joining us in the second hour, also straight out of Philly, is Tom Nichols, author, writer. I say author as opposed to writer. Some may think they're the same thing, but he's written like 15 books, and he's written a lot of articles as well, and he's got a great new article talking about censorship. And in the second hour, we're going to be joined by our guest co-host, Jason Goodman. That's all coming up today on The Backstory. We're also taking your calls, 202-521-1320, but not yet. Chill out on the calls because it's late in Russia, and we don't want to keep Mark Sloboda up past his bedtime. He's got to get his warm milk and borscht or whatever the hell he's got. You know what I'm saying? I don't know what bedtime's like in Moscow, but I assume there is some borscht at some points. But before Mark stays up too late, we're going to bring him on in about 10 minutes. And then we'll have Mark on for a half hour. Then we have 45 minutes where you take your calls, 202-521-1320. And I'm going to wait. We've got a clip. We got Ron DeSantis. And I know we've got that. And thanks for grabbing that, Rod. But I'm going to wait till Jason Goodman comes on next hour before I play this when we get into the COVID thing. Does that make sense, Rod?
Yeah, no, that makes sense.
So there we go. So Saul, and by the way, Saul, who we can now hear. We can't see me, but we can hear Saul. Right, Saul? You're hearable, correct?
Yes, I'm hearable.
There's Saul, everybody. Our multifaceted engineer, Saul. Now, because it was the 3-day weekend, there's a lot of headlines. Mondays normally would be Carmine Mondays here on the all-new Backstory, where Carmine Sabia will be joining us. But we didn't have a show yesterday because of Martin Luther King Day, and it's a federal holiday and everything. But Carmine, the reason I mentioned Carmine even, by the way, Rod, are we expected to have Carmine this week? Have we talked to him about that?
We'll find out tomorrow.
Yeah, so it's possible we'll hear from Carmine tomorrow. But the big news thing over the weekend was the dude who took the hostages at the synagogue in, call it Fort Worth, Texas, Colleyville, Texas, which is right outside of Fort Worth, which is sort of down the highway from Dallas. That's the Metroplex. I used to live there, so I know that's the Metroplex. But what Carmine, did you see what Carmine said about this event as it unfolded, Rod?
No, I didn't.
Now, some may say this is cynical, And some may say Carmine just pays attention to the way news works. What he said, this is early on when we didn't know who'd taken the hostages. He said if the guy who'd taken hostages was a white supremacist, this will be the top news story all week. But if it's a Muslim, he said, that it'll be gone by Monday. And that's what he said. Now, is that Islamophobic? Was he just, I think he was fairly prescient. Don't you, Rod?
Yeah, no, I think if that guy who did this terroristic act in the synagogue, if he was wearing a MAGA hat, the media wouldn't be able to stop talking about it. But since he's a foreigner that wasn't supposed to be here, it's not politically appropriate. It's already gone.
A MAGA hat, and if his face was paler than the butts on people in South Dakota, which I'm just assuming, I haven't seen everyone's butts, but I'm assuming when you're not getting many rays and it's cold, that your buttocks are going to be, just again, I think it's a fair assumption. You were in the medical field, Rod. Is it safe to say that if you're not getting rays, probably your buttocks are getting less rays than your face, let's say, or your neck?
Yeah, that's credible to say that.
Okay, I just want to make sure I'm medically accurate here. Now, the story's not dead, but I will tell you about this. There's very little about it. And I'll tell you what there's very little about. Like, for instance, do you know why this guy was in Fort Worth at all?
No, I did see that his brother wanted to know how he got in the country, though.
Okay, so I would say when someone takes hostages, at least understanding why they took the hostages may be of some importance. So it's over a lady, Siddiqui's her last name. I'm not going to try to get the whole name. And this guy's name, no offense to Malik in D.C., is Malik Faisal. I'm just saying, it's the same as one of our callers. It's not one of our callers, though. Thank goodness. But it was because they shot him dead. That was one of the things about this. I didn't even see initially that they'd shot and killed the guy who'd taken the hostages. Did you, Rod? Did you immediately see that he'd been shot and killed by the police?
No. Actually, I thought that he was apprehended without being killed. So that's how bad the news reporting was.
Well, and it is sparse. Let me use that word. It's sparse. Because I saw that the hostage crisis had ended, and they didn't say in the headline, hostage taker shot to death by police. By the way, apparently, I'm seeing have you seen the rabbi who was in the synagogue? He's one of the people captured. Have you seen any of the stories from him where he threw a chair at the guy?
I didn't see that story. Again, I saw different reporting. So it's funny that you're saying things that are completely opposite of what I read.
Well, anyone can find this stuff. The guy who was the rabbi in there, one of the 4 hostages. First off, one of the hostages was freed earlier before the other 3 were freed. And apparently the rabbi who was in there threw a chair at this guy who'd taken the hostages. And then he and the other 2 escaped. So it wasn't like the police came in, shot the guy, then that freed the hostages. Apparently, the hostages ran out, and then the police shot the guy. And I'm not saying, look, if you take hostages, you're likely to get shot. Let me point that out. So I'm not taking his side, but what he was in there for, and because it's a valid question, why is this guy in Colleyville, just outside of Fort Worth? And the reason that what he was talking about, because we know part of what he was talking about, because the rabbi, I think, put on the synagogue's Facebook feed so we could hear the hostage taker ranting. Did you hear that part?
I did hear that part. I did hear about that. But I didn't hear it itself, but I did hear about that part.
So what he was talking about was this woman, Siddiqui, who's been in prison in Fort Worth. This is why he was in Fort Worth. She's in federal prison in Fort Worth. Does that make sense?
Right.
So in other words, Otherwise, it'd be kind of weird. Like, why go to a suburb of Fort Worth at all? And the answer is the woman, Siddiqui, also known in news reports, this is not her name, is Lady Al-Qaeda. By the way, I'm saying it's not her name because if that was her name, I'd say there's something very suspicious there, right? If you name yourself Lady Al-Qaeda, well, you know, again, expect some trouble. But she'd been convicted. She was in Afghanistan, and she was somebody, and this is an anti-Semitic attack, and she's supposedly anti-Semitic and hates Jews. Now, what's interesting about that, for a woman who hates Jews, she was in America, and she went to two colleges, MIT, the Massachusetts Institute of Technology, and the other one was Brandeis University. Now, do you know much about Brandeis, Rod?
I've heard it. I think I've actually heard you talk about it, and I've heard it in another conversation, but I don't know much about it myself.
Okay, so Brandeis was named after the first Jewish Supreme Court Justice, Louis Brandeis. He's the one who came up with the concept of the right to privacy. This is like the late 1800s, early 1900s. He was the first Jewish American on the Supreme Court. And Brandeis University is a well-known, heavily supported by the Jewish community college. Now, the reason you've heard me mention it is one of its famous alumni is Angela Y. Davis. Angela Davis went to Brandeis, and I believe she met Marcuse, Herbert Marcuse, the Frankfurt School philosophical father of the New Left in the 60s, at Brandeis, and then followed him to UCLA and UCSD. But I believe they met at Brandeis, but she went to Brandeis. So what I'm saying is this woman, Siddiqui, who the press has dubbed Queen Al-Qaeda, and who supposedly is anti-Semitic and hates Jews, and I'm not saying she doesn't. I'm saying she went to a well-known Jewish, it's a non-denominational, you don't have to be Jewish to go there, but look it up. I'm not making this up. Brandeis is it's well-known connection to the Jewish community. So I would say if you're anti-Semitic, it's not a good place for you to go. Does that make sense, Rod?
Yeah, no, that makes total sense. And then I think that needs to be investigated of what she was doing there. And then afterwards, and then again, still how did this individual get into the country?
And what she apparently was convicted of, and by the way, she says that her conviction, she does blame Israel for her conviction, which is interesting. Now, I have not been able to really find her side of the story. And that's not because I'm sympathetic, or it's because I would like to know her side of the story. Because whenever you hear a story, well, here's what I've learned, Rod. Whenever I hear a story and there's only one side of it, it gets my, the little hairs that I have on the back of my neck, my red neck, you know what I'm saying, start to go up. And I go, why am I only hearing one side of this story? Does that make sense?
Yeah, no, I'm with you on that.
And so I don't know what's going on with her and why she's saying, if she is, because I've heard it in reports, but I haven't heard it from her. She's blaming Israel for this. She was in Afghanistan, and apparently she was on trial. She'd gone after 9/11. She and her kids left the country, where apparently, she was a neurophysicist or something like that. She was dealing with brain stuff. That's why she went to MIT and Brandeis. And she left the country, and then she divorced her husband. And by the way, I've been dumped, but being dumped for someone with Al-Qaeda, that hasn't happened to me yet. And doesn't that seem like that would sting a little worse, Rod, real quickly?
Yeah.
Right, because it's no fun to be dumped. But, at least I was dumped for a guy from Wales and not for a guy from Al-Qaeda. So I got that going for me, which is nice. When we come back, Mark Sloboda will be joining us straight from somewhere in Russia. We'll find out. Last time he was in Crimea, which seems sunny and warm. Now he could be back in Moscow, which is probably a little cooler. But we'll be back and we'll find out where Mark Sloboda is and talk about all the other stuff, including the crazy accusations by the New York Times and the D.C. establishment that came out over the weekend, going into the weekend. Mark Sloboda next here on The Backstory.
Want to talk? Get in touch with us at radio@sputniknews.com.
Deshaun, what do you want to talk about today?
Well, Bob, that's easy. I want to talk about the need to stop the development of self-driving cars.
Again, Sean, you're driving me nuts. I think the self-driving car thing's already out of the gate.
No. It's never too late. See, now the leading experts in the field, I mean, just pick one, whichever one, leading experts have repeatedly warned us about the dangers of artificial intelligence. Look, I'm telling you, man, we have to stop the robot.
2 Eastern Time, Monday through Friday, for news, politics, and culture without the two-party bias. Catch us daily on 105.5 in Washington, D.C., or 102.9 or 104.7 in Kansas City. Or find us on Twitter, Facebook, YouTube, Spotify, or wherever you get your news.
Are you bored? Are you lonely? Do you need a hug? Well, we can't give you that, but we can keep you up to date on Radio Sputnik.
And we are back, 105.5 FM, AM 1390 in Washington, D.C. Joined now by a great friend of the show, always makes everyone who listens to him smarter on this show, the great Mark Sloboda, straight out of somewhere. Are you back in Moscow, Mark, by the way? Welcome to the show.
Lee, thanks for having me. It's always an honor and a pleasure to be on The Backstory. And yeah, I'm back in Moscow.
And I take it it's cooler than Crimea, correct?
It is cooler than Crimea, correct.
There we go. Just checking. Now, does it stay relatively, because you were just in Crimea, around the Sebastopol area, because you're right on the water there, does it get really cold or does it just get moderately cold? Does it stay somewhat temperate?
Yeah, there's a tempering effect, because of the Black Sea there. Actually, I'm in Simferopol. Not Sevastopol, but I did get down there while I was there. So, winter in Crimea tends to, go back and forth, hovering around the freezing point, making it a lot of ice. That's winter in Crimea.
There we go. Now, Mark, I don't know much about diplomacy. I've never been a diplomat. I've never served in any position in the government. But here's what I know.
Really?
If you're supposedly negotiating with Russia, okay, so I make dumb jokes on a talk, on the best damn talk show in the world, but still, I don't know much about diplomacy, but here's what I know. If you're negotiating with someone, perhaps you shouldn't accuse them without any evidence of launching a false flag. Does that make sense? In the disputed region?
Well, at this point, it has to be said that in the last 2 weeks, both Russia and the U.S. have accused each other of preparing false flags to provoke a conflict. And both sides have made the claim without evidence. I think that's not a good thing myself.
Okay,
I think
that's,
it's a sign of the tensions in the area, yeah.
Well, also, let me say, I don't think you need a false flag in that area. I think you've got a real flag. In other words, the tensions between Crimea and Russia are longstanding and well-known. So it seems
Ukraine?
To me like, but here's what I worry about. The New York Times, yes, between I'm not sure what I said, between Russia and Ukraine, yes. Longstanding but by longstanding, I mean, is it fair to say centuries, Mark?
No, that's not. That's actually not true at all. And in fact, the majority of centuries, Russia and Ukraine have had very good fraternal relations. There have been, isolated incidences, but for instance, there's far more incidences historically of British and French animosity, or British or English and Scottish animosity, or even American and Canadian animosity between Russian and Ukrainian animosity. For much of their history, back to Kievan Rus, they were one people, and then they were one people again throughout the Romanov Empire period and during the Soviet Union. And the border really didn't mean much, other than a name in your passport of which part of the Soviet Union you were from. Now, Ukraine itself is nationally identity divided, and there is a big difference in the idea of what it means to be Ukrainian and what Ukraine is between West Ukraine and East Ukraine. And that is because West Ukraine, for centuries, was not part of Ukraine. It was part of the Austro-Hungarian Empire and the Polish-Lithuanian Commonwealth for that. And in West Ukraine, they hate Russians, right? They also hate East Ukrainians, to be fair, to a very large extent, and they've hated Poles and Jews and just about everybody else. But there is a great deal in the conception of West Ukrainian national identity. It is very anti-Russian. In the sense of East Ukrainian national identity, it's actually the opposite. If not pro-Russian, then it's not hating Russia. They regard them as a fraternal people, and there's so many intermarriages on both sides of the borders. It's often very difficult to tell who is Russian and who is East Ukrainian. And that is the big divide. It's in between West and East Ukraine, not necessarily between Ukraine and Russia.
Yeah, no, that's a great distinction, and thanks for making that and clarifying that. But especially since now Russia, I think, has been very good and clear on this. Lavrov's made statements, Putin's made statements recently, pointing out that the genesis of the current conflict is 2013, 2014,
yes,
with the Maidan, correct? Russia has made that clear, and correct?
Yeah, I mean, there have been tensions growing within Ukraine politically. All you have to do is take a look at any election in Ukraine over the past 30 years, since independence from the Soviet Union, or any sociological poll, and you will see the clear geographic divide. Balance that internally by not favoring the one side of the country too much, at the presidential level, and balancing back and forth between leaders. And then at the international level, by staying neutral and not leaning too far to the West and not too far to Russia. But that was all upset in 2014 when the democratically elected, however flawed government of Viktor Yanukovych was overthrown with open U.S. and EU support, because he dared say no to the neoliberal shock therapy diktat of the EU association agreement. Previously, he had been for it and had campaigned for it, and he was kind of, if not feted, then accepted by the US and the EU. But once he said no, that was it. He's got to go, and he went. And the conflict about what happened afterward, the overthrow of that government, the siege of power by the political forces of the Maidan, backed by the U.S. and the EU, and then this imposition of West Ukrainian national identity and politics over the whole country by force and repressive means, in an attempt to permanently rewrite the social political DNA of Ukraine, and to geopolitically flip it to the West. That is at the root of everything that has happened since then. And they have never successfully conquered the whole of the country, and it is very much a civil conflict lying inside of a proxy war. Whereas the forces that seized power in Kiev, the nationalist forces of Ukrainian national identity, they're backed by the U.S., the EU, NATO.
Anti-EU, he was considering the offer.
He campaigned for it for a long time. He convinced his own people in East Ukraine that it would be an economic good deal. And then when he saw the final writing on the wall, and he was expecting a large sum of money, like $15 billion or euros, to facilitate the effects of it, because it calls for the mass privatization of state assets. Ukraine is a state with very high state employment still. It would unemploy millions, maybe over 10 million people, maybe a quarter of the population. And that would be politically disastrous for anyone, of course, right? Right. It would be a big social upheaval. That is why the two Maidan governments since then, they haven't enacted the EU association agreement either. They've only processed like 30% of it, and that was the low-hanging fruit. They've never done it since either, because they knew it would result in their overthrow then. No one, can accept this without a massive, influx of foreign money to overthrow. And the two governments since, the oligarch Poroshenko and the comedian turned president Zelensky, they haven't enacted the EU association agreement, to any large degree for those very same reasons. It was too demanding, and there was no money to help ameliorate those effects, for Ukrainian society.
And so that seems what I've seen from researching this is that it seems like it just wasn't a good deal. At the end of the day, it wasn't a good deal, and Russia came along and offered a better deal to Ukraine, which is why Yanukovych ended up taking that. Am I correct on that?
Yeah. Russia was going to simply offer money, right, on a loan, but at good terms, and some investment in the country, without, of course, this conditionality. And to get you the idea, this would basically strip the EU association agreement, called for stripping everything, changing every legal code in the country, down to ripping every railroad track out of the ground, every railroad track tie, and replace it with track that would match the EU. And that's a pretty big measure in a country as big of Ukraine. You would have to level the whole country to the ground and rebuild it back up to be just like the EU, as if that's really possible, and no money to help you do it. And that's why it hasn't been enacted still.
And even around that time, 2013, let's say, Ukraine was a poor country, right? I mean, things were difficult financially, correct?
It was definitely, not wealthy. They struggled. They have struggled throughout the post-Soviet period because both their economy and their politics have been dominated by oligarchs that each one controlling his own media empire as well as a business empire, and politics in Ukraine to a very large extent has been and still is to a very high degree which oligarchs that you owe loyalty to. In Zelensky's case, it's Igor Kolomoisky. Poroshenko himself, of course, was an oligarch. Even the opposition, representing East Ukraine, that's now called the opposition bloc, Reformed, their leader is also in prison. Zelensky has now charged both on both the right and the left, or both different sides of the political opposition to him. He has charged both the leaders, Poroshenko and Viktor Medvedchuk, with treason charges that are just absolutely absurd. They're completely political, just to silence and to inhibit any political opposition to him in the country, which, I have to say, even I did not expect he would go that crazy dictatorial that fast, having been a comedian himself.
Well, no, and if we look back at the situation, you're talking about oligarchs ruling Ukraine. One of the ways I started noticing when I was researching Russiagate, because I think a lot of this, I view this all of a piece with Russiagate. I view the Russiagate story, part of it was to mask the truth about what had happened in the Maidan, for instance. And
Sure.
One of the guys who I noticed was a oligarch named Viktor Pinchuk, who was the biggest single donor to the Clinton Foundation. And therefore, Ukraine was the biggest country donor. And I noticed that seemed bizarre to me. So who is Viktor Pinchuk? Remind people who he is. He was an oligarch, correct?
Yeah, he's one of the Ukrainian oligarchs, and he has been powerful politically, and he has always been one of those who saw more business interests in Ukraine being associated with the West than with the East, primarily because that's where he was invested, not because of any ideological reasons. And yeah, he did butter up and drop a lot of money into the Clinton Foundation and others. And it has to be said. There's no question that the U.S. has, really meddled in Russian politics. I mean, they made a movie about how, proud they were for helping Boris Yeltsin get elected again, when he was not. I mean, it was insane meddling, and that whole election was, according to a lot of experts, really rigged. But among these accusations that Russia meddled in U.S. politics with a few Facebook posts and so on. That's really absurd. There are countries that have and regularly meddle in U.S. politics, right? We're talking Israel, Saudi Arabia, the United Kingdom, and one of the ones that it really meddles to a large degree that has never been called out for it is Ukraine, and that's specifically in the last 10 years.
Yeah, although in my research going back, like Joe Biden was meeting with Ukrainian people, diaspora people, back in the 80s when the John Demjanjuk case.
I'm familiar with the name. I don't want to say I'm intimately familiar with the figure.
So Vivitsky was the guy who they were talking actively about making when they got rid of the prosecutor general. It's what in the U.S. would be the attorney general. Vivitsky was one of the guys who they were actively talking about, maybe we should put him in. And he goes back to the 80s, lots of connections between the Ukrainian diaspora and Vivitsky. And I'm just saying that what you're calling, and I agree with it completely, it is meddling in U.S. politics. But I would say that it's kind of welcome meddling. In other words,
there's meddling that is completely accepted, like the constant Israeli money with the IPAC. That is a huge fixture in U.S. politics. The meddling by Saudi Arabia, Qatar, the UAE, they fund half of the think tanks in Washington D.C. Right? That is its own form of meddling. This type of meddling is the good meddling, because these countries or individuals like these oligarchs are or want to be geopolitically aligned with the United States. And when they are, that's perfectly acceptable.
Now, where in the current situation, now the talks have officially ended between the U.S. and Russia, although there may be more discussions coming up, where are we? Are we any closer to a conflict, do you think?
Yeah, I think we're a lot closer. So where we are now is Russia has asked for in the type of asking that it's not, it's basically an ultimatum that because after the meetings with the U.S. and NATO last week, that they want a written response. They want this official. Like they made their draft security treaties calling for security guarantees to the U.S. and NATO public, which the U.S. and NATO were very upset about. They don't want transparency in this thing. They don't want to be called out on it, and of course they're not going to offer legally binding security guarantees to Russia and promise that NATO will not expand further forward and that they will stop the de facto NATOization of Ukraine on the ground. They're not going to agree to any of this. That is perfectly obvious. So Russia is waiting for this response, and then the question is, then what do they do? And what the Russian, government officials, the deputy foreign minister Ryabkov in particular, who has taken the point of this, has said, is that Russia will take appropriate military technical measures. And what does that mean? That is the Russian equivalent of American diplomatic speak saying all options are on the. No one has real legitimacy in Ukraine to that point. So the attempt either legally or de facto to bring Ukraine into NATO and turn it into a military outpost against Russia, that's viewed as a red line, as simply unacceptable. It would be, Russia refers to it in terms of the Cuban Missile Crisis, how unacceptable it is. And in just the last week, Russia said as one of their options, we could consider reopening military bases in Cuba or put them in Venezuela. And the U.S. immediate response was, we would take decisive action against that. Where they had just a week earlier, they had been saying, well, in the case of Ukraine, a country has the right to ally with whoever it wants to militarily. That's the right of a sovereign country. Well, obviously, some countries are sovereign and some are not then. This is the hypocrisy. You only have that sovereign right to ally with who you want if you are allied with the U.S. If you're Syria or Iran or Venezuela or Cuba or anyone doing business with Russia, you don't have that right. So, we see the hypocrisy there. They would view that as a unacceptable threat to their security, and they would take actions. Well, Russia is seeing the same thing. They are seeing 10,000, according to the Russian Foreign Ministry, 10,000 NATO trainers and advisors, quote unquote, on the ground. And that should give any American shades of Vietnam, right? The way military force was called on the ground. We found in the last week that CIA has their own version of special forces on the ground, on the front line, in Ukraine as well. We have seen the UK announce that they are building military bases, naval bases in Ukraine. We have seen Turkey, which is a NATO member, sell combat drones, Bayraktar 2, TB2 drones, to Kiev, to the regime in Kiev, which has used them to conduct airstrikes in the Donbass. We are constantly having this training going on, the indoctrination of Ukrainian military into the NATO military practices. All of this, Russia says, no, you can't continue this. If you do, we're going to have to do something. And the question is, what is the Russian government going to do? And they have a range of options. And I don't think even at this point they have made a final decision what they're going to do. They're still hoping against hope that the U.S. will do something substantial to alleviate their security concerns, like making Kiev actually finally 7 years later fulfill the terms of the Minsk Accords, which they show no sign of doing. But if they don't, Russia's range of options could be anything from putting new hypersonic missile systems in Kaliningrad to opening military bases in Cuba or Venezuela. To, at the far end, extreme end of the scale, is a military intervention of some form, some degree, in Ukraine. I think there's plenty of signs that the Russian military has taken steps, not that they're building up forces on the Ukrainian border, but that hundreds of kilometers back in Russia, they have created logistical centers that could be used to arrange that buildup in very short order. And that's actually, if you read past the headlines, what all, the New York Times and Washington Post is writing about. But the details are buried beneath the salacious headlines and stuff. But it is still very much, and all options are on the table. And I think those options are getting more extreme.
And Mark, we only have about 30 seconds left, but does Belarus play a factor in what's happening in terms of it? Yeah, just talk about that real quickly.
Belarus is upset because they regarded a lot of the color revolution regime change stuff against them in the last year coming out of Ukraine, and I would expect that they would play a large military role as well. If we didn't actually see Belarus troops involved in a potential Russian military intervention in Ukraine, then they would still allow Russian troops to attack from the north as well. And again, it would be not a Russia against Ukraine, but a Russian intervention against the regime that seized power in Kiev in 2014. Russians don't see Ukraine as a whole as their enemy. They see this U.S.-backed, political force that seized power in Kiev as their enemy.
And anyone can look at a map and see the Yelnya, which is where the troops have been built up, they're saying, and really they just remained there, is up by Belarus, right, Mark? That's
it's closer to Belarus than it is to Ukraine. That is true.
There we go. Mark Sleboda, fantastic appearance as usual. Stay warm there in Moscow because you're no longer in the temperate south. But Mark Sleboda, fantastic appearance. When we come back, we'll be talking about a whole bunch of stuff and taking your calls, 202-521-1320, and getting ready to have Jason Goodman co-host the second hour as the guest host today on The Backstory.
Every day we ask questions.
How is Facebook going to prevent suicides?
Well, do you see this as being a human rights violation?
Are the cows really stinking up the planet that much?
To move ideas forward.
A gravitational wave is a ripple in the fabric of space and time.
I don't think the launch of the satellite proves anything at all.
Where do good ideas come from? We connect with independent thinkers, hear their ideas, and create stimulating debates on real issues.
The Dow is in a correction. As I said, commodities across the globe are collapsing. Why is that the case? Because we are in a global recession.
That is set to change because Iran has approximately about 50 million barrels, which it had put in storage during the height of the sanctions regime, and that's ready to be released as soon as possible.
Where is the money?
The super-rich individuals and the world's biggest companies are able to hide money in tax havens.
Is there a solution to the crisis?
No, because I don't think anything useful has come out of any of the policy reform discussions with respect to financial reform.
They give us answers we aren't always prepared for.
What are the chances that the report would make the Israeli authorities to review their policies towards the Palestinians?
Oh, probably zero.
This recession will be even worse than it was in 2008.
But that would be the nasty way for it to happen, But because of Guantanamo, the U.S. is no longer taking so many prisoners, so instead of taking prisoners, they kill people.
A lot of people think that he's now unelectable and a bad leader.
Wow, that's just so much information to take in.
Pay attention, there'll be a test on this later.
Taking notes.
Welcome to the show.
Wow, this is crazy. We're definitely talking sci-fi over here. From 20 years ago, people would never have believed this. Crazy times we're living in.
I'm still trying to wrap my head around this story. This is a fantastic story.
Yes, it is a fantastic story, and it's a worldwide problem.
Welcome to the party.
We are back. You're listening to the best damn talk show in the world. I'm Lee Stranahan, investigative journalist. And thanks again to Mark Sleboda for joining us. Rod, it's always great to have Mark on. That dude just knows a lot. And it's more of a dose of truth than you're going to get from the rest of the media all year. Would you agree with that?
Yeah, no, the media is so bad on this. But it was interesting that Mark called out the Russian media, saying that the U.S. was bearing false flag as well. So he's pretty even keel about it, and he's fair.
No, he is. That's one reason we love having Mark Sleboda on. Now, I don't know if you don't play the markets, do you, Rod? Are you a stock investor?
I follow the crypto markets, not so much the stock.
Well, they're kind of its own crypto market because the stock market, but it plunged over 500 points today, down 540 something at the closing bell. And if you look at the numbers on it, it's been going downhill like a Coney Island roller coaster for a few weeks now. So part of why, and I'll tell you, this is not related to it. This is, in a sense, positive news, but tech news, is that Activision, the video game company, I've known Activision since the Atari 26, this is how old I am, Rod, the Atari 2600 days. Activision is an old school game company. They're being acquired by Microsoft. Now, the big games people would know Activision now for are the Call of Duty series of, incredible graphics and gameplay on Call of Duty for us dudes. And then for Microsoft taking them over, this is a push by Microsoft further into gaming, because Microsoft has been, with Flight Simulator, which is graphically amazing as well. I just picked that up a couple months ago. But also with games like Age of Empires, Microsoft has been into games, but Activision is a big acquisition. That was a tough sentence to say, by the way. Activision is a big acquisition. See, it's tough. The words kind of sound similar. For Microsoft. But the bad news on the market, this could be what they're reacting to, is that energy prices are reaching a high. And it seems like those are going up. Now, is that news to you, Rod? You buy gasoline. Is it shocking to you that energy prices are going up?
No, and it's even worse. It's even worse in Europe, and hopefully we have a guest to talk about that.
Yes, and hopefully we won't be. Again, I'll tell you, one of the advantages of being in Sioux Falls, South Dakota, is that in my apartment I only pay electricity. By the way, I was flooded over the weekend. Did I complain about that to you, Rod?
Yeah, you talked about it on Friday, and hopefully that all dried up and you're all better now.
Yes. So I had fans here until this morning. They finally took the fans out. But
Not
they
fans
had
of the show, right?
No. Those would not have helped in the flood. Actual loud fans. I had to sleep with fans on Friday night, which was, whatever. It did get rid of the water. But they've also, my floorboards are slightly ripped up still, and they need to tack my carpet back down. So you've got to imagine my situation in my immensely cool living room. And I will say this is not the demographic I'm going for, but I'll still take praise wherever I can get it. The guy who was head of maintenance, I would say he's in his, like me, 50s, maybe early 60s. He did say that I had the coolest apartment he'd ever seen. And again, not my demographic. I prefer the ladies to say that, but okay. But my girlfriend Danny does admit I do have the coolest apartment she's ever seen. So but right now my cool apartment, all my stuff is because the carpet got wet. We had to, by we I mean mostly Danny, God bless her, move my couch into a corner of the room. We had to move it away from the wall, right? So all of my possessions are like in 1/4 of my living room. Have you ever had that situation when you've been moving or wherever, where you push all your stuff that's normally spread out across the room? Suddenly it's all like in 3/4 of the space. Do you know what I'm talking about, Rod?
Yeah, we had a flood here where we stay about 2 years ago, right before Christmas. So yeah, I know exactly what you're talking about.
Yeah, so it's weird because I can get to my couch and I can sit there or lay there, but now my couch is 1.5 feet from my TV stand, which luckily I don't use. I just used it as furniture. I got rid of one of the reasons my apartment's so damn cool is last year, I had a big TV. I had like a 70-inch TV. But then I realized that was not big enough for me, and I was paying too much for it because I was renting it. So I got rid of that TV, and now I have a 100-inch projector hanging from my ceiling, because all I really was using the TV for was art. It was like a picture frame, and I use this app called Artcast, and I have art. Now it's projected on the wall, and it's gigantic. So now, the TV stand is just furniture. It's just like a bookcase. And then on the wall behind that is 100 inches of whatever. I'll tell you what else. My girlfriend said she didn't know about this. So if she didn't, a lot of people might not. Have you ever explored, let me, you know what I'm going to ask? Saul, get ready. I want you to answer. Saul, because for reasons that Saul will understand. Saul, have you ever explored psychedelic YouTube?
The music genre?
No, the graphics genre.
No, not much.
Okay, so I'm going to tell everybody, but Saul, pay attention, because this will give you something to do for the next couple of weeks. If you go to YouTube and you type in psychedelic graphics, you will find a number of some live 24/7, some are video streams that are like 12 hours long. Some are only a couple hours long. But what they are is trippy graphics. And some of them, look up psychedelic graphics recursive. If you want to freak yourself out sometime, over on YouTube, people have posted hours of just psychedelic graphics. And it's an interesting genre. Rod, are you familiar with this at all?
I've never gone to the YouTube, but I've probably seen the graphics personally myself on a trip. So I've never gone to the YouTube, but I understand what it's about.
Well, the way YouTube works, and we'll take Ingrid, we'll take your call next hour, top of the hour next hour, because you know there's not enough time to talk to you right now, but we'll take you right at the top the next hour. There's a couple, you know the way YouTube works, Rod. If you start researching something, if you start looking into muscle cars, let's say, YouTube will feed you more videos on muscle cars. Does that make sense?
Yeah, the algorithm,
you know how they work. They're right. That's the way the algorithm works. So let me tell you two little video rabbit holes. Psychedelic graphics. If you start looking into that, they will feed you in. Then the other thing to look up is pole dancing. That's all. You can pay attention to this too. But Rod, have you ever looked into the competitive pole dancing videos on YouTube? Many of which are in Russia.
No, never.
Okay, so if you type in St. Petersburg, a city I'd like to go to because it's supposed to be beautiful, and this is certainly beautiful, there's a big pole dancing competition. Now, by the way, the ladies are all dressed, you know, so no one's naked, but they're very good at pole dancing. And Rod, you've been down to a Virginia men's club where Roger Stone held an event, so you know that pole dancing, if done right, is very athletic, right? It could be an Olympic sport, correct?
Oh no, I give those ladies credit. You know, you gotta have incredible strength to do the stuff they do, upper body and lower body sometimes.
Now, as much as they appreciate the credit, they would prefer $5 and $10 bills, I think. That's just a guess. But again, they'll take the credit. But if you look up St. Petersburg pole dancing, you'll find a number of videos. And Rod, here's the hell of it. This is the hell of it. If you do that, YouTube's algorithm will start sending you other pole dancing videos. So you see the dilemma.
Once you're down that hole, you can't get out of pole dancing.
Right, and that's not as dirty as it sounds. But there, and I'm really serious. This is a St. Petersburg pole dancing competition that was done like an athletic one, except it's ladies spinning around on poles and using their leg muscles, shall we say. And now, if you combine those, and I'm saying that looks pretty good. The St. Petersburg Pole Dancing Festival also looks pretty good, projected on your wall, 90, 100 inches from a projector, I'm saying. especially if, don't forget, I don't have any kids around. Through no fault of my own, I don't have any children around. Therefore, I don't feel bad. Should I feel bad as an adult watching pole dancing competition from Russia? Rod, should I?
No, I would consider that, I think you're investigating, so that's part of your job.
I am, right. It's all a write-off. I'll say that, sure. And also, if I were smart, I would be saying to my boss, Mindy here, hey, guess what we need to investigate? Guess where my next trip abroad needs to be? Abroad. See what I did there? Coming up, one more hour. We got Tom Nichols joining us, and Jason Goodman will be the guest host for the next hour. We'll take Ingrid's call when we come back. But I've given you all some good... By the way, we may never see Saul and Rod again. They just may be watching YouTube for the next week. Here. This is why we're the best damn talk show in the world on The Backstory.
Listening to Radio Sputnik. Telling the untold.
And we are back live for the second hour of the best damn talk show in the world. The only talk show that brings you geopolitics, American politics, and psychedelic pole dancing videos. Think about that. I'm an investigative journalist, often investigating Lee Stranahan, and the rest of the crew is here. Our multifaceted engineer, Saul, and of course, our producer, Rod. And our guest host this hour is the great Jason Goodman from Crowdsource the Truth, here on The Backstory. Now, do we have Jason in the house?
I just almost fell down a pole dancing hole, though.
Did you look up? Did anyone?
I did.
Rod, Saul. Wait. Who said they did? Jason?
I did. Yeah, in the green room. It was on the pole dancing videos.
And I'm not lying, right? They're well produced.
Yeah.
Pole dance.
I was skeptical, Lee, but you know what? The first one I saw was a young woman all the way at the top of the pole, and it looked like she was standing sideways, like horizontally on the pole, defying gravity. I haven't quite figured out how she did it, but I was impressed.
And if you're looking for naked ladies, you're going to be disappointed. But if you're just looking for extremely athletic ladies, doing something that some ladies do naked, I'm just saying.
Mm-hmm.
I'm not even saying any of these ladies ever have, but it is impressive. And there you go. Now, I will say one thing. Watch this. Jason, I'm going to let you do the boom this time. Just say the name of the show and listen to what happens.
Backstory.
It's strangely satisfying, isn't it?
It is. It's good.
And I will say this. My former co-host, John Kiriakou, anybody who listened to the show with John would know if I'd mentioned something, he'd be looking up on his laptop immediately. That was one thing John was very good at. So I'm just asking, Rod and Saul, have you, in honor of John Kiriakou, have either one of you searched for that? St. Petersburg pole dancing?
Yeah, I did. And like I said, one of the women's, her legs are really strong. You can see she's very defined from the waist down. So, like I said, they're very physically fit.
Yes, and again, this is the kind of thing I do think. If our boss is listening, I think I need to be sent to St. Petersburg. I will do an in-depth investigation of this, and this might single-handedly jumpstart the talks between Russia and the U.S., particularly if we can get Bill Clinton on board here. I'm just saying.
Hey, Lee, interesting side note about St. Petersburg. You know, a lot of early work in stereoscopic cinema was done in Russia. And I don't know if it's still there, but there was a very famous cinema, a 3D cinema called the Stereo Kino in St. Petersburg.
That's very interesting. And Russia's got a long Krasnogorsk-made cameras that were very affordable 16-millimeter cameras 20, 30 years ago. And my brother, who you know, Jason, my brother Ken, a very talented visual effects artist, look him up on IMDb, Ken Stranahan, I dare you. It's not quite as sexy as the St. Petersburg pole dancing, but still, Ken just bought a couple of Russian lenses for his Micro Four Thirds camera, Jason. And what's interesting about them, now watch, this is why our engineer Saul is so multifaceted. Saul, if I were to use the term bokeh, B-O-K-E-H, you're familiar with that term, correct, Saul?
No, what is it? Oh, you mean the pattern?
Bokeh, yeah, it's the pattern when a lens goes out of focus and you're aiming it at lights, for instance. How would you define bokeh, Jason?
Bokeh is the out of focus area in a shot that, you know, you have to understand the concept of depth of field to understand bokeh. When you focus a lens, and this has become less of an issue for modern photographers because your cell phone has such a small imaging sensor, but if you get a traditional 35-millimeter camera or a digital camera with a large imaging plane, you'll see this. When you have a large opening on the lens, or a long focal length, or a variety of different factors that can control this, there's a narrow range of items that will be in focus. You'll see this a lot in fashion photography, like if it's an ad for perfume or something, you might have the model's eyes in focus, but even her tip of her nose and the stuff behind her will fall off into softness. That area of specific softness in the photograph is the bokeh of the lens.
And different lenses, because of the way lenses are constructed, have different patterns for the bokeh. And my brother just bought a Russian lens. It's got a very unique pattern, Jason.
Yeah. Well, the iris, how the iris is made, and all the different aspects of the lens contribute to that look.
You're listening to Russian Camera Talk here on PBS 1982. But so, again, we went from psychedelic video to pole dancing to bokeh and Russian lenses, and that's why we are the best show. I want to make sure we get to Ingrid because she patiently waited. Then when we come back from whatever Ingrid wants, whatever's on Ingrid's mind, I got a clip of Ron DeSantis I'd like to get your opinion on, Jason. So Ingrid in D.C., thanks for holding. What's on your mind?
Ingrid dropped off.
Oh wait, sorry.
We don't have Ingrid, so let's go to Ron DeSantis. Not that there's an equivalent. But so Ron DeSantis did a press conference, and he was talking about stuff about COVID-19, and specifically about testing. And I thought Ron DeSantis made some very good points here, and I'd like your take on what he has to say. Have you heard DeSantis talking about testing, Jason?
I heard him a few days ago, and the general sort of sense of what he was saying I thought was quite smart. He said, if you're not sick, don't get tested, because we don't want to use up the tests for people who need them or overwhelm the test facilities, or get you over to a test facility where there might be a lot of sick people and you could get sick.
And so it must be the same thing, because I sent this a couple days ago, but I wanted to talk about this. And this is the kind of thing, this is why a lot of the media really hates Ron DeSantis, because he says stuff like this that I just think is common sense. So let's hit that, Saul.
Now think about it. Before COVID, did anyone go out and seek testing to determine if they were sick? It's usually you feel like you're sick, and then you get tested to determine what you maybe have come down with. And so this is kind of a new thing where they've been saying just go out and test all the time. And again, you're free to do it, but I think what the DOH guidance from Florida is saying is that is unlikely to yield very much clinical value for you. And it also creates a lot of second-order follow-up problems. It's essentially a lockdown by stealth in the sense of if you test positive but you're not sick or have symptoms, you may have to isolate they don't even know. The test can't tell you if you're even infectious or not. And these PCR tests, you can test positive for weeks after you've been infected, months even in some cases. And so what happens is blanket testing of healthy people, it leads to some kids being not in school. It leads to people not being able to go to work and doing some of these isolation, which may not even be justified. And so I think those guidelines are very sensible. And again, it's not saying people can do what they want to do, but I can tell you to just force healthy people like businesses to do that or whatever. We don't advise that at all. We think that's a mistake. We think people should live their lives. And then if they develop symptoms, you can obviously get a test. And if you're at risk and the treatment would really change the course for you, we obviously want to see that treatment done.
Now, am I right, Jason, that a term that we've heard a lot in the past year or so, asymptomatic? Isn't asymptomatic another synonym for healthy? If you're
not
healthy,
sick. Yeah.
right. If you're not sick, you're asymptomatic, correct?
Yes, and there are many people who have spoken out and said, traditional thinking is that there is no significant spread of illness among asymptomatic people. This asymptomatic carrier, label is sort of a new COVID era thing.
It is, and I think the way DeSantis started it by saying, did you ever used to go get tested? You never woke up in circa 2019, 2018. You never woke up and said, I feel really good today. I'm going to go get tested, right?
Right. Well, I'll give you one more, Lee, because, my father years and years ago had a medical scare. And he wanted me and my brother to go get tested for, if it was a congenital kind of a thing and whatever. And we were all right. But then I started saying to him, well, why don't I get tested for this? And why don't I get tested for that? Let's just test for everything, And he said to me, look, it's just generally not done. Because anytime you do some kind of medical test, they're subjecting you to magnetic resonance. They're subjecting you to radiation from an X-ray machine or a contrast chemical, or in the case of shoving this thing up your nose, someone could make a mistake. There's, poke you. They could, there could be some contaminant on there. The point is, anytime you do any kind of medical intervention, there is some degree of risk. It could be extraordinarily low. But the point is, you can't just go testing willy-nilly, because even if you did 1,000 tests, the 1,001st thing that you didn't test for could make you sick.
Now, speaking of which, the other things in the headlines now this afternoon is apparently Joe Biden, the Biden administration announced a month ago, Joe Biden announced, by the way, I got a programming note. Let me just do that first. Tomorrow, Wednesday, not only do Jason and I do the show High Dive, right, Jason? We're doing that tomorrow night.
Yeah, absolutely.
And I got lots of very interesting stuff. Do you know what we're going to talk about tomorrow night on High Dive, Jason? Is the opium wars.
Oh, yeah, that's good. Good topic.
And I didn't know much about them, but I was doing a lot of, in my blood-infected apartment, a lot of research on, 19th century stuff I think is significant now. And these opium wars, you can't understand, for instance, HSBC or even why the current situation in Hong Kong exists if you don't understand the role of the opium wars. So we'll talk about that tomorrow. But the other thing that's happening tomorrow, this is a programming note for the backstory, is tomorrow at about the time this show starts, Joe Biden is doing what I think will be his 10th press conference in the year or so he's been president.
Wow.
And that's not many. And by the way, the question I want to hear from someone in the press corps, if you're listening to the show, here's the question. It's a simple question, Jason. 3 words. Ready?
Yeah.
Are you okay?
I'm good.
No, I'm saying that's what I want the press to ask Joe Biden. I want someone to raise their hand and just after they listen to him answer something, raise their hand, and then when they call on him, if he does, say, "Are you okay?" Because I think there's some questions. Joe Biden may be symptomatic of something, right?
Absolutely.
He's not entirely
early onset dementia.
That's right. Should he get tested for that? Is there going to be a rapid test for early onset dementia? And by the way, in his case, I would argue that it's not exactly early onset dementia. You follow me?
Well, his doctor...
Me getting it.
Right. His doctor wrote a book or a medical paper or something along the lines of, when air hits your brain, it's never the same. And Joe Biden has had 2 brain surgeries, I believe.
Yeah, and he's not that young. I mean, I'm not that young. I'm 56. But you know what? If I get to his age, what is he, 115? I forget what Joe Biden is.
I think he's 79.
Okay, close enough. But if I get to 79, expect some dementia, and hopefully it'll be at least entertaining.
Well, you won't run for president, I hope.
No, and if I did, I'd be better. Me with full-on dementia, crazy me, would be a better, more popular president than Joe Biden, right? And because I'll tell you what I wouldn't do. I wouldn't hector people. I wouldn't. His whole method of speech is, hey, come on. Like the way we talked to Mark Sloboda last hour, the way I expect Joe Biden at the negotiating table to be is, hey, come on. What are you doing? Don't invade Ukraine.
Come on, man.
Come on. Come on, man. Come on, Vladimir, man. What are you doing? That's the way I expect him. And by the way, it's all a lie anyway. But still, that's his method. So Joe Biden giving his first press conference in a while, and he's only done 10 of these things all year, the year he's been president. But that's starting at the same time as the backstory. But we know how things go with these press conferences.
He'll be hours late.
Right. He's going to be late. So what we're going to do is tomorrow, the show will start like normal, and then at some point, we'll cut into the press conference. When Biden starts yapping, and I say that respectfully, when he starts yapping, we're going to cut over to the press conference, and you'll be able to hear the whole thing, or at least the parts that aren't, at a certain point, we'll stop. And then we'll talk about the press conference and what we just heard. So that's the programming note for tomorrow. That's what's going on Wednesday's show.
But, Lee, let me ask you something. Trump probably did 10 press conferences in the first week he was president.
I don't know about that, but he did a number of them. And one way to look at how biased the press is, I read a story in this, and they admitted that his predecessors, all of them, had done a lot more press conferences than Biden has. But then they said, but he did over 200 press availabilities. Do you know what that is? Because I've been to plenty of those. You know what that is, right?
No.
That's when you see the president walking to the helicopter.
Oh.
And I've been out there. First off, the helicopter is very loud.
Yeah.
It's very loud. And what happens is the president walks from the residence down by where the gardens are, and all the reporters are huddled up behind a fence. And what happens is, as the president walks by, I've done this, so I'm going to get back from the microphone so as not to frighten Saul. But you go, Mr. President, Mr. President, and you kind of hope you make eye contact, and he points at you. Never happened with me. But the people he does that with then repeat their question, and that's a press availability. And those count for nothing because there's never a follow-up. Usually the questions they'll take are, Mr. President, who do you like in the Super Bowl? That kind of thing. You see what I'm saying?
Yeah.
Or like, do you think Tom Brady's going to have a good Super Bowl? And then he looks at the camera and gives a thumbs up and keeps walking. Does that make sense?
And there were some weird ones with Biden where there was something, someone had some inexplicable, like, visual effect with like a microphone boom sticking out of the ground or something. They had two different angles. I don't remember exactly when that occurred, but there's so many strange, production anomalies with Joe Biden's. Like, why do we need this set of the White House, Lee? Have we arrived at a logical explanation why Joe Biden is using the romper room White House instead of the regular press room?
Yeah, no, that was weird to me. And that was the kind of thing where I feel like they're trolling everybody in the world sometimes. And are like, hey, let's do something for the conspiracy theorists. Who everyone thinks that Stanley Kubrick directed the moon landings, which Vivian Kubrick has said on the show he did not. But everyone who thinks that, here's a little something for you, right? You'll be able to forever point to Joe Biden sitting in a fake White House.
Yeah.
Right? Because that actually did happen.
Yeah. I have an interesting Stanley Kubrick story, Lee.
What's that?
Well, an interesting Stanley Kubrick story. Obviously, I never met him, but, the visual effects supervisor for 2001: A Space Odyssey, I'm sure you know, was Douglas Trumbull, right. And so for, I think, maybe the 50th anniversary or the 75th anniversary of the film, the Visual Effects Society in LA had a big kind of screening event where this was prior.
And by the way, Jason, let me just brag for 1 second. That was out of my head. That was not me looking at notes or Googling something. I know Doug Trumbull, who worked on legendary visual effects supervisor on Star Wars, the first Star Wars, the only real Star Wars film.
So he was giving the presentation when I saw it. This was early 2000s. Kubrick had already died. And Doug Trumbull was a little bit upset at this party because he was trying to, it had been billed as showing a 70 millimeter print and all this. And it was prior to Quentin Tarantino doing The Hateful Eight, which involved the restoration of a number of 70 millimeter projectors that were shipped around the country. And at this time, in the middle of Los Angeles, the Visual Effects Society could not get a functional 70 millimeter projector. So we just saw a 35 millimeter print, but Doug Trumbull had a lot of negative things to say about Stanley Kubrick. He was upset that Kubrick had taken the Oscar for visual effects on the film, and he went into great detail as to how the visual effects were done. They had rooms filled with people hand painting frames on the film.
Yeah, but don't complain about the way the Academy awards things. You see what I'm saying? In other words, I get some people don't like it, but where this happens all the time. And Jen, we'll take your call in just 1 second. Writers complain all the time.
Yeah.
You know what I'm saying? They say, "Well, I wrote this," and if you got a film, a lot of films will bring in this script doctors, Jason. And the script doctors may write the most memorable lines of dialogue from that film, but they don't get credit because the way the Writers Guild gives out credits, they've got basically it's something so script doctors don't get credit.
Yeah.
You know what I'm talking about. But on the other hand, if you're a script doctor, you're probably making okay money. You probably live in a nice house in Southern California, so stop whining. That's what I'll say. And, of course, the big thing in 2001, as you know, and this is not related to the St. Petersburg pole dancers we talked about earlier, was the slit scan. You know this, Jason.
Yes. He spoke about that.
Was the slit scan, if you look at the parts where the ship is going through a slightly surrealistic space with long streams of light coming at it, anyone can look up slit scan 2001 and you'll discover the techniques that Doug Trumbull, again, Trumbull, I would argue, was responsible, a lot of it, of let's say Star Wars, the first Star Wars film, now referred to as A New Hope, but I just call it Star Wars. Right? You know why, Jason? Because that's Star Wars. Yeah, I really loved I thought Close Encounters was a phenomenal film. And by the way, very conspiratorial for those of you who are into that kind of thing. Because what there was in Close Encounters of the Third Kind, and then we'll go to Jen, is, as you remember, Jason, the government faked a accident out by Devil's Tower.
Mm-hmm.
Remember that's part of the plot of Close Encounters.
Yeah.
Is the government lied and said that a train had crashed and released poison gas, and that was to keep the people away from the space landing. That's kind of conspiratorial, don't you think?
Absolutely, but it also might be the type of thing that some governments might do.
No, absolutely, and that's why Steven Spielberg did consult with top UFO experts there's a lot of stuff about UFOs. We talked about it a little bit on the show, and we had Jamal Thomas on the show to talk about it. But there's a lot of that stuff that is valid, not conspiratorial stuff. Now, real quickly, let's go to my friend Jen. Jen, what is on your mind? You're calling once again when Jason's on.
Jason.
So I get what's going on here. Go ahead.
You two together are great, by the way.
Thank you.
So I just wanted to mention, you were talking about the Biden photos and stuff. The one you might have been talking about was the one where it looked like they entered the set of The Hobbit, where he was with the Carters, Jimmy Carter. And
yeah.
And they're like kneeling down, and they look like giants, and then the Carters look like hobbits. And
you know what, Jen? I'm sorry to interrupt you. That was an extreme wide-angle lens, and if you look at the picture again, like Joe Biden's feet look enormous. There are some things that are, closer to the camera that are very exaggerated in size. And that, I mean, again, there are a lot of lenses that do some strange things.
Well, no, I understand, and I agree. Like, I read the explanations for it, but I have this app called Pixlr, Pixlr.
Mm-hmm.
I'm not selling it, by the way. But basically, you upload a photo into it, and you can put all these different filters. And filters are really interesting because you can see when something's photoshopped. I'm not saying that, but it's really interesting. And that photo looks, I'm just saying it looks photoshopped.
Could be. It could be.
I saw it, and I don't have any evidence other than my theory, but I just wanted to throw that in there because I thought it was interesting and you guys were talking about it. So.
Yeah.
Well, part of the problem now is that every photo goes through Photoshop at some point now, right? Jason?
Yeah.
And
absolutely.
Photoshop does not mean
grossly manipulated. They could have just brightened up Joe Biden's face. Maybe there's a shadow that they didn't want or something that just makes the photograph aesthetically not great. And then, if someone is there just sweetening a photo, you never know. They go too far.
Or resized it or whatever.
Yeah, resize it in some way. I don't know what the point of. I remember when that photo came up and people were saying, oh, it's like, well, okay, so if someone manipulated it, what does it do that it's now manipulated? Is it like Bigfoot in the picture or something? I don't know.
And I'll just point it out before we go to a break and then we come back with Tom Nichols. And we're talking to Tom Nichols. Tom's written 15 books, Jason. That's 15 more than me. So Tom's a great guest, and we're going to be talking about censorship and a new article he wrote. But I will point out, in terms of pitching myself, that I need to go to St. Petersburg to cover the next pole dancing competition. I'm going to say that it's got the very political title, you've seen this, of Revolution. You saw that, right, Jason?
Yes.
So I'm just saying there seems to be a political. By the way, Rod, feel free as part of your job, if you can get any guests from there to talk about that competition, feel free.
Rod is great at getting guests. So I think if there's anyone who could do it, it's Rod.
Yes. And he may need to research extensively, but that's a topic I feel comfortable we can cover on the show. Coming up, Tom Nichols, and this is going to be a fascinating thing on the history of censorship, Jason, and how things have kind of flipped the script on censorship in the last few years. Something we've talked about, but Tom's written a fantastic article on it. Tom Nichols next on The Backstory.
Stuck in traffic? No problem. Stay informed. Stay tuned to Radio Sputnik on 105.5 FM or 1390 AM in the Washington, D.C. area. Need more? Follow us on Facebook or check us out on SputnikNews.com.
When the going gets tough, the powerful want propaganda. But we won't let them cancel the facts. Whether you're woke or drowsy, we know that you can handle the truth, and we're giving it to you every morning. Fault Lines with Thomas and Stranahan every Monday through Friday from 7 to 10 a.m. Eastern. Your first stop for sanity in a world gone mad.
In a media landscape filled with so-called journalists acting as stenographers for their billionaire bosses, there is a desperate need for news, analysis, and perspectives that buck the status quo and get to the heart of how domestic and international events impact you and me, as well as showing how we can get involved in the struggle to change that status quo. Check out By Any Means Necessary on Radio Sputnik, Monday through Friday from 2 to 4 p.m. Eastern, to hear the stories and voices that mainstream media refuses to tell you. And join us as we connect the political, social, and economic movements shaping the world around us. That's By Any Means Necessary, Monday through Friday at 2 to 4 p.m. Eastern, right here on Radio Sputnik.
Hi, I'm political analyst Garland Nixon.
And I'm political scientist, author, and nationally syndicated columnist Dr. Wilmer Leon.
We're the co-hosts for The Critical Hour, airing Monday through Friday from 6 to 8 p.m. Eastern Time here on Radio Sputnik in Washington, D.C.
We close out your day with a thorough and hard-hitting analysis of the day's top stories, where we bring in brilliant scholars, authors, and investigative journalists from around the world.
And on Fridays, it's panel time, when we do a roundup of the week's most important issues.
Join us to keep up with the world's top stories.
Enjoy an in-depth analysis.
And have a little fun along the way. Listen to our show,
The Critical Hour, Monday through Fridays on Radio Sputnik.
And we are back for the final hour of the backstory. Jason Goodman is our co-host. Hey, Jason. Having fun?
Hi, Lee. Yeah.
Always a great discussion with Jason Goodman. And this is especially appropriate. Once again, our intrepid producer, Rod from Philly, has done a fantastic job. Tom Nichols is joining us. He's a great friend of the show. We had him on a number of times. He's written a number of books and articles and knows quite a bit about the history, for instance, of Philadelphia. That's one of his areas of expertise. But today, we're talking about something that I would say, Jason, every writer should care about, but few seem to, which is censorship, right?
Every person.
If you're
every person.
Yeah, but especially if you make your money from writing, you should care about censorship. You see what I'm saying?
Sure.
I agree. You should care, but fascinating article. And Tom Nichols is joining us. Hey, Tom, how you doing?
Hi, Lee. How are you?
I'm groovy, thanks. Now, let's get the plug out of the way, because I want people to be able to find this article. Tom, tell people where they can read your new article on censorship.
They can find this article at Broad and Liberty. It's online. Just go to Google and put in Broad and Liberty. You don't even need to put in Philadelphia after Broad and Liberty, but it should come right up. And if you put my name, it'll come up faster, of course.
And you have written 15 books, is that correct?
Yes, officially 15, yes.
Well, how many unofficially? 400, or what's going on with the unofficial books?
Well, there were some that never quite saw print, some that I discarded. I think every writer has a story like that. Some that you left abandoned, like a ship at sea or whatever. But 15 officially published books. I published my first book, which is a metaphysical science fiction novel myself, because I didn't think it would ever be published. So, and then as soon as I paid the money to have it vanity printed, another book of mine was picked up by a publisher. So it was a good lesson in how never to pay for your own work to be published, because you wind up with boxes of books in your basement and you don't know how to distribute them.
Well, but I have a question for you about that. First off, when you say metaphysical science fiction, do you mean sort of in a Philip K. Dick sense, or the more philosophical parts of Heinlein, let's say? What do you mean? What would you I know it's no fair, but if you had to put it in a category of something people might be able to identify with, who would it be?
That's a good question. And by the metaphysical science fiction, I mean science fiction that doesn't include robots in space or a machine coming to life or gizmos that are monsters undercover. This was a book about developmentally disabled children primarily with Down syndrome who are really higher intelligences in disguise and who are spying on humanity. And it involves an end-time scenario with people commonly referred to as people from other planets or people from outer space. So it's kind of the condition of the soul and how, you know, people with Down syndrome have been looked down upon and considered lesser than, when really in this book they are highly intelligent alien intelligences in disguise. So it was a great fun book to write.
No, it's very interesting. When did you write that?
Pardon me?
When did you write that?
Oh,
what
yeah.
year?
This was a while ago. This was published in 1988. And,
wow.
And then right after that, I had another, but much less out there, kind of fantasy, metaphysical book published about Thomas Merton and an island, and the main character who wants to become a monk, but he's conflicted with his sexuality. He can't reconcile sexuality with the demands of religion. So it's kind of a satire based on that struggle.
Oh, very interesting. Now, Tom, let's start based on what you said. Let me ask you a question, which is sort of the good news before we get to the bad news, which is censorship. But do you think electronic publishing, like Kindle typically people think of, but there's lots of electronic publishing, it changes the game for an author like you in terms of you're not worried about having boxes of books sitting around. At worst, no one buys it, right? But does that change the equation for authors?
Well, online publishing, and I'm assuming you're referring to books that people can publish by Amazon, for instance. You know, you get a cover, sometimes you get quality paper. It looks good online. You order a copy, and it's printed and within a day. But essentially, I mean, I actually have 2 books on the home list that I did on Amazon. And while one of them is an exceptionally good book, I've never seen real proceeds from these books, and I've given readings from one book all over the city, and I haven't consciously, like, seen a dime. I mean, so I think books on Amazon, I think they fatten your resume, and they look good, so you can pound up your ego, but I don't know how far they go in terms of really reaching people. But I think the good thing is that they can come up by accident when people do research, and they're certainly there. So it's certainly better than nothing. But again, Amazon, they don't promote books, and a book's life or death depends on promotion and marketing. And sometimes you can handle that via word of mouth, but often you need a PR marketing person.
Okay, so that takes me into the subject of your great new article. Let's talk about censorship. Before we get into the history, let me ask you something. I'm curious, what possessed you to write this? In other words, there's a lot of stuff to write about. Was there something that stuck in your craw that made you want to write about the subject now, for instance?
Well, I was just thinking about the arc of censorship and how it has changed over the decades. I remember as a boy, as I say in the article, I used to walk around with petitions in my neighborhood from my parish church, and they were for the Legion of Decency, which basically got non-Catholics or people in the neighborhood to sign petitions to prevent movies like The Pawnbroker from being shown at the local theater. I mean, this was an overstretch, but when you're a boy of 8 or 9 or however old I was, you don't think of those things. You just do it. But this was a form of censorship. And so it was my first up-close and personal experience with censorship. And then later, as I began to read, was in high school, I, of course, realized that there were books in the world that were banned. And I do mention Henry Miller's Tropic of Cancer, books like James Joyce's Ulysses, which had a horrible struggle with the censors, D.H. Lawrence's works. And as I point out in the article, this kind of censorship, unfortunately, came from conservatives who were worried about the moral fiber of society and protecting children from these works, or even protecting adults from these works. As you know, that all changed over time, and sex became like whole milk sold at the supermarket. I mean, now you have you have highly fetishized pornography on Google. You can literally write anything on Google, and there it is in front of your eyes in full visual splendor. And so there's no censorship regarding sex or literature now, but that's all changed to the world of ideas. And so you have to, use an oft-quoted phrase, you have, I guess, what you could call cancel cultural censorship, songs, and it goes into things like statues and words and things of that nature, and I think that's where we are today. And so now, right and the left have been guilty of that.
Well, Tom, let me ask you a question, because don't we have an even more sinister form of censorship right now, where what you're describing is somebody's out there saying, hey, I don't like the content of this movie, I don't think it should be seen. And the person who is for that movie could confront that person, interact with them, convince them otherwise. What I'm so troubled by are the censorship techniques that are happening where they're sort of clandestine. When Google erased...
I mean, there can be, but there's less of a recourse to sort of change the original decision. In the old days, you could, as you said, educate people, and then people would come around to your way of thinking. But we are in a ideological war, and things are frozen.
Mm-hmm.
There's just very little movement.
It's quite scary.
Now the story that we covered recently was on this show was in Virginia. There were a number of schools that had books that were graphic novels that showed a 10 or 11-year-old having sex with an adult. And that got some people upset, but those were actually defended by the local school board. These were all over Fairfax County, Virginia. Wow. And I looked it up, and again, I'm not a prude, but is there, what's interesting is that's the kind of thing that's actually being promoted by the school board. And they said to pull that out was a blow against homophobia. And so how do you see the politics of that kind of thing playing out right now, Tom?
Well, that to me it's contradictory, because first of all, there are age of consent laws on the books.
Right.
And you have to abide by them. I mean, they do differ from country to country. In Europe, Spain, it may be 12, it may be 15 in Portugal, it may be something else in Morocco, etc. But here, there are definite laws, and I don't see how any school board could be pushing books like this that advocate something like that and say it with a straight face and a steady look and think that they're doing right by it. And to claim it's a form of homophobia is just pure insanity. because people are still arrested for having sex with minors, and it's taken very seriously in most quarters. So it doesn't. To me, it's a line of confusion. To say something in a book and then to go out and do it and then to find yourself in jail and on a list for like 40 years. I don't see the,
Tom, doesn't it also cross the line? Like you were describing a movie. And if it's a movie, we know there's already certain restrictions. Like I'm sure there have been a lot of movies that have come out that people don't like, violence, sexuality, etc. But movies like that are already restricted to adult audiences. When you're talking about, sexual content in books for children, particularly at public school, I think that that's a different area where, we're talking about kids, not the general public. And it's also, that's not really an idea. Promoting a criminal activity is different than promoting an idea. Isn't there a way, a cartoon relationship like Bert and Ernie, or something like that? I'm not saying that they're a homosexual relationship, but aren't there analogies and things that can be used to tell children that it's all right to be friends with people or whatever, but to be promoting underage relationships in children's books, that's just wrong.
Yeah, there's no way that anyone could say that it could be right. I mean, so I just don't understand it. Say that Bert and Ernie are gay. I mean, so what? They could be gay. They could be straight. I always thought of them as having no sex at all, or no.
Yeah, they're just buddies hanging out.
They're like two. Yeah, I mean, I don't know, but certainly, I mean, I don't know where this whole censorship thing is going to wind up. I mean, certainly, you get degrees of censorship, though, with any publication that you write for. I think if you're a writer, there are some editors or groups of editors who may object to something just because it doesn't fit their program agenda, their editorial policy. And I think that's how a lot of times articles are rejected. But it's not censorship that is talked about. It's just, well, this isn't a good fit for us.
Now, going back to one of your earlier points, when people publish their own things on Amazon, this is another one of the sinister ways they can censor. I have never written a book and certainly haven't self-published one, but I've spoken to many people who have. They can change the price, and I've seen them make the prices of these books either go so high that no one will buy it, or so low that if anybody buys it, you're not getting any money. And this is a way of censoring authors. I mean, if you spend all this time writing a book and they sell it for $1 and you make, $6 the whole thing, you're not going to write another book, really.
You're right, and also Amazon does something else. When you submit a manuscript for publication for their, for their like online a buffet table of new titles, Amazon people go through it, and the things that they object to are just unbelievable. It could be one word, it could be one phrase, and a lot of the times they don't even tell you what they object to. You have to go through the whole book and sort of second guess and kind of plead your case.
Wow.
Demand that they get specific. There have been instances in the 2 homeless books that I did where the objections occurred around something so innocuous. It was just, I could not believe it. So it's almost like writing for Amazon is writing for, I don't know, I don't even know how to describe it, but everything is very, very well sanitized, and it's certainly very, very PC and tapped into the current cancel culture.
Right.
Well, and when you look at this cancel culture, it's one thing I'm sure we'll talk about tomorrow on High Dive, Jason, too, because it's one thing I was thinking about. Everyone talks about and knows about the censorship that goes on in journalism. And we talk about bad journalism all the time on the show and on writing. But it occurred to me that journalism deals with the present, right? In other words, what are the headlines today? Whereas, and anybody can look at it and notice that a lot of what they call civil society is about promoting philanthropy. Jason, you've seen this with Soros or any of these people.
Yeah.
They talk about them as philanthropists. And it seems to me that philanthropy is about controlling history. Because if you think about where the philanthropy goes, it's to universities and to museums, for instance, culture. And what controls history? Well, it's taught in universities and portrayed in culture. So when you talk about where you see this going, Tom, where are we right now? Forget where it's going. Where are we at right now? Because it seems pretty dangerous right now.
It is. It is dangerous because the map that you have just drawn is so, as they say. This is exactly where it's coming from. I think it starts from the universities, then it goes to the museums, and it goes to a city's cultural institutions other than museums. And you can see it just in the informal press releases that you get online in the form of an email. Something simple like announcing a press preview from, let's say, Philadelphia's mural art project. The director sent something out, and she would sign her name, and underneath would be the name pronouns, colon, her, and she.
Yeah.
This is a straight woman. She's a legend. She's like been around forever. But how easily she taps into this two-step, PC, ideological, brainwashed, and it's just amazing. And even, theater press releases that I get, somebody in charge of marketing will, under their name, there will be the name pronouns, colon, he, him. It's just, I find it like just so twisted and surreal.
It's off-putting.
We are at a very, very dangerous point.
Yeah.
No, and as you say, nobody's questioning it either. If people get that, people are not like, and it's also when it's done and they list their pronouns and they're abnormal. What I mean by that is, when if you're born a dude, and now you want to use ZE, then mention that. But I don't see any reason to mention, if you're a dude with a dude's name, to mention he, him. Why mention that? Just assume that men and women are going to use the normal one, unless if someone wants to use Z or Zer or whatever, then you should let us know that. Does that make any sense at all, guys?
Yeah.
I got a point for you guys to consider, because I called a law firm the other day, trying to hire an attorney. And they had their, onboarding person or whatever call me back and ask me all these questions about the case. And she asked me, what are your pronouns? And I didn't end the phone call when she asked that, but I wanted to. And I get it that people are asking this because they want to be sensitive to transgender people. But just because, calling somebody him, if they were biologically born a man or appear to be a man, might insult someone, how do they know it doesn't insult me to presume that I'm anything other than he and him? And frankly, it does. I am upset that a lawyer would even ask me that.
Well, and of course, Jason, you're a native New Yorker, so your pronoun is yous.
Exactly.
Right?
Use guys, technically.
Oh, a bit of levity. But yeah, I think you're right, Jason. I would have probably hung up and I said, "Well, this fun discussion is over now.
Yeah,
we're going into cartoon land now."
Yep.
That's kind of sad.
Yeah, I agree. And the reason, the reason it bothers me is because I think it encourages people who have a legitimate concern. Body dysmorphia, gender dysmorphia, this is something that's got to be addressed. But I think it's a disservice to these people to promote these permanent, irreversible body changes that there have been studies that show huge percentages of male to female transgender patients commit suicide. So it doesn't seem like a good solution to me. And I'm not saying I'm transphobic. I'm concerned for the people who are vulnerable, who are being pushed into something that's being normalized that I don't agree with. And if I say that, I get canceled. I mean, I'm saying it here on Sputnik Radio, but if I said that on YouTube, it would be a strike.
Yeah, that's true. You would get your channel censored or thrown off. So, yeah, I mean, that's unfortunate because, I mean, certainly a lot of people who are gay have problems with the whole trans thing, and, a lot of gay people still resent the fact that the transgender movement kind of attached itself
right
the old school gay movement, and because they are really two different issues. They're completely different.
Yeah.
The whole term LGBT, for instance, I've never thought that was, if you know anybody who's LGB or T, that's not a comfortable alliance. That you have different interests and there's a lot of, I talked about this, Kristen Sinema, for instance. She's a bisexual, openly senator from Arizona who's in the news. There was a liberal publication that said she shows the problems with bisexuals. They're selfish. Kristen Sinema. Now, I'll put it like this. If she'd been a lesbian and that article had come out, people would have said, they would have thrown a fit about that.
Right.
Do you agree, Tom, that for some reason it was okay to attack her because she's bisexual? Because some people... Go ahead, Tom.
I mean, everybody likes to throw stones at bisexuals because, I mean, gays do it sometimes and straights do it too. And it's like you have to choose a side. You can't like both. That's not allowed. It's only one pick. And I mean, I've seen examples of this all my life, and people get upset when you say that you're bisexual. And so it's become this big sports mentality, like, one team is enough. So I don't get it, but that's been a problem.
Well, it would be like if I said, well, we have to be cognizant of the KUBRH community, which stands for Korean, Ukrainian, Black, and Redheaded. In other words, you could put that group together, sure. You could say, in a sense, they're all minorities, but really, they're different. They're not the same. And the obvious difference between, for instance, gay men and lesbian women is some are men and some are women. I know that that's not popular, but there's all kinds of differences. Tom Nichols, fantastic conversation, as usual. Thanks for joining us. Great conversation. Check out his new piece, Broad and Liberty, is where you can find it. Jason, you had fun, right?
Absolutely, Lee. Always. And I'll see you tomorrow night on Patreon and Subscribe Star for High Dive.
There we go. And thanks to Jen for calling in. We'll be back tomorrow on The Backstory.
Listening to Radio Sputnik. Telling the untold.
Good evening. Welcome to the Critical Hour. We're coming to you from the capital of the United States of America, Washington, D.C., here on Radio Sputnik. I'm your host, political scientist, author, and nationally syndicated columnist Dr. Wilmer Leon, and I'm joined here by my co-host, political analyst Garland Nixon.
Thank you, Wilmer.
For the next 2 hours, we will explore and analyze the salient news stories that are impacting the global village in which we live. As a former U.S. intelligence officer, our next guest sees a red flag in the CIA's latest anti-Russia playbook. The agency has a long and largely unsuccessful track record when it comes to dueling with Moscow. For insight into this, we turn to our first guest. He's a former U.S. Marine Corps intelligence officer and author of Scorpion King, America's Suicidal Embrace of Nuclear Weapons from FDR to Trump. He served in the Soviet Union as an inspector implementing the INF Treaty in General Schwarzkopf's staff during the Gulf War. And from 91 to 98, he was a UN weapons inspector, and he is the author of this RT piece. Scott Ritter. As always, Scott, welcome back.
Thanks for having me.
You write that reports that the CIA is running training programs to prepare Ukrainian forces for unconventional warfare bear an uncanny similarity to a long-exposed Cold War-era project. If history is any judge, it's likely to end the same way. Pick it up there, Scott Ritter.
Well, I mean, let's just start with history. At the during World War II, Germany had this long involvement in the Soviet Union. They occupied it. They had a intelligence directorate, I think the 12th directorate, which was responsible for running human agent networks in Soviet lines. And as the Germans withdrew, they left stay-behind elements, trained spies who would stay behind and allow themselves to be overtaken by the Soviets and then report back to the Germans. This was a very efficient network. And when Nazi Germany was defeated, the United States captured the head of this organization, a gentleman named Galen, a German general, and we took it over completely. We brought Galen, his officers, and everybody in, and we made them a standalone intelligence operation working for the United States, controlling this network of agents, operating inside the Soviet Union. And then later on, we used these agents who networked with resistance forces in eastern Poland and in western Ukraine, and we helped facilitate this resistance. I mean, this was large-scale resistance. To give you an idea of when this was all said and done, around 250,000 people were killed as a result of this resistance, including upwards of 20,000 Soviet soldiers and security forces. So this was some heavy duty fighting. About 300,000 people were deported out of Ukraine in punishment. So we're talking about over 500,000 people whose lives were torn asunder by this. But it failed. I mean, that ultimately, at the end of the day, it failed. The CIA converted this active resistance, unconventional warfare activity into a propaganda activity, part of their normal covert political action against the Soviet Union, and they would smuggle out writings by various Ukrainian dissidents, and then they would publish these and then smuggle them back in as finished product to have them disseminated. And this continued up until 1990, when the Cold War was on the verge of ending and the CIA shut the program down. Largely ineffective program. We have a press report now that says, starting in 2015, the Obama administration tasked the CIA's paramilitary wing. This is a ground branch of the Special Activities Division, covert operators, top secret stuff. People, many people don't even know they exist, even though there's a lot of stuff in the press about it. These guys don't broadcast who they are, what they do, et cetera. And yet now we're reading about it in U.S. media from 5 former intelligence services. So right off the bat, that's the red flag that said something's wrong here, because when I've worked with these guys in Iraq, and they're very secretive, they don't like their their projects to be broadcast, especially when the projects are ongoing, as this one signed. But at the end of the day, what the story said is that the CIA has sort of revived the unconventional warfare programs of the past. They are training select Ukrainian military and intelligence personnel for stay-behind operations, meaning that if Russia was to invade Ukraine, these units would purposely stay behind, allow themselves to be overtaken, and then they would report back on intelligence about the Russian, the Russian forces. They would carry out, sabotage operations, blow up trains, etc. And most importantly, perhaps, is that these forces don't have to wait for Russia to come in. They're designed to operate in Russian-occupied territory, which the Ukraine and the United States view Crimea as representing this. So, in addition to being a deterrence to Russians invading Ukraine, these forces could be injected into the still considerable Ukrainian population in Crimea and be used to carry out unconventional warfare / resistance operations there. This is violent stuff. This is war. It's not. This isn't something to be just poo-pooed aside. This is serious stuff. And that's what the reports indicated. But as I said, the fact that we have 5 generals talking about it, or 5 former intelligence officers talking about it, the fact that you and I are talking about it means it's not covert anymore. If this program truly existed, it doesn't exist anymore. It can't exist anymore. It's been compromised. And I think that was the whole purpose of the media story was to put out this story to get the Russians to pay attention, maybe to get the Russians to think twice about invading Ukraine, to get the Russians to divert resources into defending against a shadow threat, things of that nature. It's the kind of psychological operations that often take place. So that's my take on it. I think it's and the other thing I will say this is that the Russians had one of the reasons why the Americans failed in the aftermath of World War II is the Russians had the Galen network thoroughly infiltrated. Every time we sent somebody in, the Russians had a reception committee waiting for them. Said, hey, thank you very much for coming on this uninvited tour. We'll take that communication system, and you have a choice of either working with us and dying quickly at the end, or we're just going to kill you and your family now, and we'll wait for the next guy to come in. The Russians rolled this whole thing up, and if this was happening today, I would bet a dime to a dollar that the Russians similarly have it 100% under their control. They may be even controlling who gets recruited by the CIA. They know everything about the program. And if it were real and Russia did invade Ukraine, this program would cease to exist in a matter of moments because the Russians would just round everybody up and kill them.
I'd be real concerned if I was this group, the rest of Europe. Because when I look at that, here's what it sounds like. They're trying to turn Europe into the Middle East. They're saying, okay, if the Russians are, let's face it, if you're creating this group in Ukraine, they're going to be the neo-Nazis. Right? They're going to be the true hardcore believers, which means that the Americans are saying we have been or are creating, however you want to view this, an ISIS-type Nazi group in Eastern Europe. Well, those kind of groups, it's like owning a werewolf. They don't listen real well. So you create this monster, and they don't like something that's going on in Germany. Well, they'll just go over and be like, you're a little too close with the Russians there. We're going to do some assassinations in Germany. We're going to blow something up in Poland. And those French, can't stand the French if you're a neo-Nazi, got to go over there and blow something up. So basically, if I'm in French or German, I'm thinking, these idiots are talking about creating a Nazi ISIS in our midst, and then we're going to have to deal with them. Scott, am I wrong?
No, you're not wrong. Look, we already have a history of this. The CIA's efforts in Ukraine that we just finished talking about back after the end of World War II were part and parcel of a larger unconventional warfare program called Gladio. In Gladio, we worked in Greece, we worked in Turkey, and we even worked in Germany. The idea was that if the Russians invaded, we would have these resistance teams in place to this program. Italy had a Gladio problem. Germany had a Gladio problem. Everywhere the CIA goes and does something like this, it never works out the way we want because, as you said, we create this monster But Frankenstein don't work for us. Frankenstein works for Frankenstein.
Is that also because at the real basis of Gladio-type programs and the United States intervention into countries through processes like this is the enemy of my enemy is my friend? And so it's not morally based. It's not based upon anything that's really intended to benefit the people of Turkey or Ukraine. It's elite based, corporate based, and the enemy of my enemy is my friend.
I mean, for the case officer on the ground, they know that. They're not stupid. They understand exactly what they're dealing with. But you can't sell that program to politicians. You can't sell that program politically. And so the CIA sells the Gladio-type operations to their political bosses as these are great guys. They believe in what we're doing. This is part of the, this is defending America's presence and America's role, and it's defending democracy, and it's defending all the good things. I mean, these guys believe in mom, apple pie. They play baseball, damn it. I mean, these are good guys.
But do they drive Chevrolets? That's the question.
Well, we tried to train them to drive Chevrolets, and they might drive Chevrolets. But, the point is, they're none of these. These are bad people. These are ideological fanatics who believe in what they believe in. Which creates this cellular structure that we find attractive. We say, oh, we can use that for our purposes. But their thing is, oh, the Americans are going to give us guns, money, and training, so we're just going to nod stupidly at everything they say, but we're just going to do whatever the hell we want anyways. And that's the way it is. And that's the way it will always be, because we can't control these people. And, if we were to try and recruit like-minded people, that would require the United States to actually have people on the ground who had insight, who were sympathetic and empathetic to the real needs of an indigenous people. When has an American case officer ever had that in his resume? It's about 100% supporting American objectives.
Any of this, the United States is actually more secure.
No, remember, you're 100% correct. Look, the people that are advising President Biden today are ideologues.
Got it.
They're not national security experts. These are people who were raised on one thing and one thing only, and that's the hatred they have of Vladimir Putin, and that drives their life. And it's so far removed from real national security as to be literally on another planet.
And just real quickly, when Hillary Clinton says one of her chief foreign policy advisors is Henry Kissinger, I say, oh my God, we're still in trouble. 30 seconds.
Look, Henry Kissinger has a track record that speaks for itself. That's all I'll say.
Scott Ritter, thank you so much for your time. I appreciate that chuckle, and we'll look forward to having you back.
Well, thank you very much.
Thanks, Scott. You're listening to The Critical Hour on Radio Sputnik. I'm Wilmer Lee, and I'm joined here by my co-host, Garland Nixon. There's more on the other side. Stay tuned.
We are above all the latest developments, and we don't take any sides. Radio Sputnik, telling the untold.
We are back, and you're listening to The Critical Hour on Radio Sputnik. I'm Wilmer Leon. I'm joined here by my co-host, Garland Nixon.
Thank you, Wilmer.
Blinken to travel to Ukraine amid tensions with Russia. Secretary of State Anthony Blinken is traveling to Ukraine to meet with the country's president and foreign minister amid heightened tensions between Kiev and Russia. What does this mean going forward? Well, for insight, we turn to our next guest. He's an author and international security analyst, Dr. David Walalu. As always, Dr. Walalu, welcome back.
So good to be with you guys.
Blinken met with Ukrainian President Zelensky and Foreign Minister Kuleba today to reinforce the United States' commitment to Ukraine's sovereignty and territorial integrity. This is according to State Department spokesman Ned Price. Dr. Walalu, it's reported that Blinken is there amid heightened tensions. It seems to me that his visit is causing the heightened tensions, not calming the waters. Your thoughts, sir?
Well, where do I start, Wilmer? You know, this is kind of like ridiculous to begin with. Why it's ridiculous? And I'm not using it to be sarcastic here. I am using it to highlight how hollow our foreign policy is, how we lack vision into how we deal with this. So now you got Blinken saying that because we want to sort of reinforce our commitment to Ukraine's sovereignty and territorial integrity. Come on, take a step back here. Why aren't we, the U.S., we, NATO, we, the West, why haven't we got back to Russia's security proposals yet? And right there, it gives you an idea. This is nothing but a smoke screen.
Mm-hmm.
It's just highlighting or telling the world, look, we are marching on a diplomatic path to solve the issues with the Russians. It's the Russians that they don't want that. That's nonsense.
Dr. Walalu, you know, in going along with what you're saying, it seems to me that this is consistent with the Biden administration's policy, which is big on public relations and little on practical policy. So they go there, and, you know, everyone who understands international security knows that if the Russians were to choose, which right now they have, for a number of reasons they haven't and don't appear in a rush to, but if they were to choose to attack Ukraine, the Russian military could dash Ukraine to rubble in hours. That's the reality. So this business about we rhetorically support you and your integrity and all of that foolishness is public relations, and I think maybe public relations for the American people as a group of senators. They also go over there, we're supporting you, blah, blah, blah. But if the missiles start flying and Ukraine's turned to rubble, then they're like, but we know you might get turned to rubble, so we'll sanction somebody or something, which they can't even sanction them because the sanctions would so backfire on the U.S. and EU. At any rate, your thoughts?
Well, you're absolutely correct, Garland. It's because the idea that they know Americans, not all, of course, I shall not generalize here. There are some smart Americans among us that can read between the lines. They know this is nothing but just hypes, you know, because here is the argument, you know. If we are, let's say, on a serious footing as far as finding a diplomatic solution to the tensions near Ukraine border, why haven't we answered the Russians' security proposal? Why are we dragging our feet on that when the Russians proposed very clear, concise ideas as to pertaining to security? Why NATO didn't answer that back? So the Russians will have to move forward whatever way. It's because their security is threatened, you know. And this is what I don't understand, why the West and the U.S. in this aspect do not realize that those are serious concerns to Russians. They're not going to compromise on that. And we're trying to, send the Secretary of State. He's going to go later on to meet with the Germans, with the French, with the Brits. For what? Keep escalating till when? When you could only respond to those security proposals and come to an agreement. But we're not willing to do that. And this is why you are going to see, just for your listeners to know, we're going to be hearing this more, as I put it in quotes, Russian invasions, Russian aggressions, turmoil on the Russian border with Ukraine, and all this. We're going to be hearing those a lot. Because now you got senators that are supporting, arming Ukraine, providing weapons. Is that a gesture to de-escalate, in your opinion? I don't think so. Any smart listener will realize, yeah, we are saying one thing and doing another.
I'm glad you mentioned Blinken traveling to Berlin because that's the next direction I wanted to go. It's being reported that Blinken is going to go to Berlin to meet with German Foreign Minister Annalena Baerbock and hold a meeting with the transatlantic Quad, which is made up of U.S., France, Great Britain, and Germany. All of this while TASS is reporting that Berlin sees no alternative to stable relations with Moscow, and the new German government is ready to work on mainstreaming them. Foreign Minister Annalena Baerbock said, during my visit, I'd like to emphasize how important relations with Russian Federation are for the new federal government and for me personally. This is a whole different narrative coming from Germany than we were hearing from her just last week. So is this an indication that as we look at how Germany is now interpreting this, as the winter is getting colder and they're concerned about keeping their houses warm, that the U.S. policy is on fire?
And might I add, France has said it seems like some of the European countries are falling off this aggressive attitude.
And so it seems as though Europe is telling the United States now publicly, look, don't start this fight in a yard you can't control, and don't start this fight in a part of the world where you're not going to suffer.
Well, you're absolutely correct, guys. It's because here's the thing. You look at this from two angles or two perspectives, one from the German and one from France. So from the German part, Germany understands that dealing with the Russians will be better to deal in a diplomatic manner. They've had a long history, of course, and this is why the former Chancellor Angela Merkel, she knew how to handle and deal with Russia. She pushed back against the U.S. You know, from France's perspective, France didn't forget what the U.S. did to them regarding the submarine for the Australians. They're not going to forget that, of course. But France also, just for your listeners to know, France, as of today, is the president of the European Union, which means what? Which means controlling the foreign policy direction, because France sits at the authority chair, whatever you want to call it, because that's how it works in Europe. Because when you think of the EU, who do you think of? You think of France, Germany, basically. Mm-hmm. That's about it. Back then it used to be the UK. UK is gone. And that's going to lift the UK. Of course, the UK is just hanging there by itself like a lost child, per se. And this is why Europeans are realizing we cannot follow blindly here. And as I said last time, I remember in one of your shows, guys, I did mention that there are conversations inside Europe as to not go in the same direction. So what it means to me personally is that you start seeing the cracks emerging. And Blinken needs to go to Germany to sort of put a Band-Aid on that to make sure that the cracks don't get wider.
Now, let me throw something out at you. This might seem a little strange. You know, the U.S. just sacrifices countries. Right now, they're turning Ukraine into an arms depot. And they're just saying, you know, we might let the Russians dash you to pieces. And if so, we'll start a partisan war afterwards. So if the Russians don't turn you to rubble, then the partisan war will cause misery for your country. And then it'll probably leak out to other countries. And we'll just completely disrupt Europe. That's fine with us. If I'm the Europeans, I'm looking at and saying, the U.S. will stick a country out there and say, we're backing you, see South Ossetia, and then when that country gets beat up on, they'll run and and let you get beat up. If I'm Europe, all of Europe, I'm thinking the same thing. I'm thinking, what if the U.S. is like, well, you know, if we get the Russians and the Europeans in some kind of a war and Russia and Europe is badly damaged, they're both out of the way and we're back to 1946, and hey, we're the industrial power again. If I'm Europe, I'm not thinking as an ally. I'm thinking maybe the U.S. is going to sacrifice us to some kind of war with Russia and then go on about their business to make themselves the global hegemon. Anyway, is that too conspiratorial?
No, it's not. It's not, because that's a reality, Garland. It's because hypothetically, and this is just for your listeners to know, hypothetically, should a war erupt between the U.S. and Russia, guess who's going to be burned first?
Europe.
We all know.
Yeah.
We all know.
Well, that was my point. That was my point about Europe is saying to the United States, you're trying to start a fight in a yard that A, you can't control, and B, people here are going to suffer, and you got.
During the 3 meetings, Ukraine was not there. So it almost feels like to me personally, and this is my own interpretation, is that Tony Blinken is going to tell Zelensky, hey, do not say anything publicly here. It's because that gives you an idea right there that the decision is not made in Kiev. The decision is made in Washington. And Europeans are very, very aware of that reality. And they are not willing to stick their neck out there for something that they're going to be damaged. They understand that reality. Now, here is the challenge to Russia. That's going to be. The challenge to Russia is they can drag their feet either on this proposal, security proposals. If they demanded the answers and they need to set a date, if they don't get an answer, they're going to need to do what they need to do, because otherwise they're going to lose credibility.
It seems as though the policy focus in Germany as well as the EU has already shifted slightly away from the U.S. position. Now, as a result of these meetings, it doesn't seem like Blinken's going to be able to shift it back. Is the United States going to have to change its narrative?
Well, Blinken cannot shift it back. No U.S. secretary can shift it back because we lack credibility. We can't.
So that's my point.
Yeah, you're absolutely correct. And what's going to happen to the U.S.? Till we fix our structure of the foreign policy and deal with those Europeans, deal with the Russians issues, deal with other issues in a manner that kind of sort of provides the same respect for the others, that like in the case of Russia, we should consider their security interests when negotiating with them. I mean, what do we expect? We expect countries to just bow to us?
Yes.
That era has long gone.
And as we get out here, that to me shows or validates a position that we've been articulating on this show for quite a while, that it's old wine in new bottles. It's the United States antiquated thinking fighting new issues with old strategies. 30 seconds.
Yeah. You're absolutely correct, and this is where I said in one of your shows that the mindset of the Cold War did not leave Washington, and that's unfortunate.
Dr. David Oualaalou, as always, thank you so much for your time. Greatly appreciate that perspective, that analysis. We look forward to having you back.
My pleasure. Anytime.
You're listening to the Critical Hour on Radio Sputnik. I'm Wilmer Leon. I'm joined here by my co-host, Garland Nixon. There's more on the other side. Stay tuned.
Questions are the most powerful weapon we have. As long as you have questions, we'll keep asking. Radio Sputnik, telling the untold.
Peer into the future with Political Misfits on Thursdays, when we analyze the latest trends in news, politics, and culture. Catch us on 105.5 in Washington, D.C., or 102.9 or 104.7 in Kansas City. Achtung, baby.
We are back, and you're listening to the Critical Hour on Radio Sputnik. I'm Wilmer Leon. I'm joined here by my co-host, Garland Nixon.
Thank you, Wilmer.
With new nominees, Biden attempts to assemble most diverse Fed in history. Late last Thursday, he completed his set of Fed picks, choosing Sarah Bloom Raskin, Lisa Cook, and Philip Jefferson to fill the remaining open slots. If confirmed by the Senate, the nominees would make the Fed board the most diverse in the central bank's 108-year history. What does this really mean? Well, for insight, let's turn to our next guest. He's an associate professor of economics at the University of Missouri, Kansas City, former president of the National Economics Association, Dr. Linwood Tauheed. As always, welcome back.
Thank you.
So I think it was Dr. King who said the increase in numbers means nothing if they don't add up to more. With these names and this discussion of diversity, your thoughts, what does it mean?
Well, first of all, congratulations to Lisa Cook and Philip Jefferson, two colleagues of mine, for their appointments. I think they're going to do the best they can do on the Fed under the circumstances. And what I mean by that is this. The Federal Reserve Board has a particular mission, and it has tools for carrying out those missions. It has two mandates. One is to deal with inflation. We're in an inflationary period now, so what they do will be important. But the second mandate is also to deal with unemployment. And the Fed has given those two mandates, and they are in conflict with each other, at least traditionally. That is, if the Fed decides that the economy is growing too rapidly, and therefore you have inflation, if that's the reason for the inflation, its tool it has is to increase the interest rates. Its interest rate, which increases interest rates in banks and mortgages and other kind of things, which has a tendency to slow down the economy, which has a tendency to increase unemployment. So it has these two mandates which are in opposition to each other. And so that's the structure within which the Federal Reserve operates. And having diverse economists who may come in with different kinds of thinking about how you might balance the process between inflation and unemployment doesn't give the Fed any new tools to deal with that. And so, the Federal Reserve, which is considered to be very important and very powerful, has a powerful tool, but that tool is very limited in what it can do. To put it this way, the Fed has almost no power to increase economic activity because that's up to businesses, whether they produce or hire employees and so forth. But it does have the power to cause a recession, to put it in that way. And so if the Fed missteps, then we can find, yes, inflation will come down, but we can also end up with a recession. And I hope that the diverse voices will put the concentration on not increasing unemployment, which may mean we live with little of this inflation until the situation that's causing it is addressed, which I think mostly is supply chain issues and also kind of the COVID effect that's being continued by Omicron.
So, Garland, in a common parlance, that means the Fed can't fix the game, but it can damn sure mess it up.
Yeah. You know, when I was teaching at Police Academy, I always tell my students, there's no situation so bad that a police officer can't make it worse. But, Dr. Tauheed, but let me ask you this. It's interesting you say that because I have heard it said, and maybe you can clarify this for me, that the Fed doesn't, I'll put it like this, doesn't exist for us, for the common man, and I use that in the term of mankind, that the Fed is there to stabilize things for the banks. The Fed is there to stabilize things for the system, to stabilize things for the financial segment, not for us. So maybe intentionally it doesn't have the tools, or that's just not. Maybe you could discuss, tell us about that.
Well, the first mandate in terms of addressing inflation is a mandate that the Fed has traditionally taken very seriously because inflation is bad for banks. And it's bad for banks because as banks lend money, when that repayment comes, that money is worth less. In fact, the interest rate is supposed to be calculated to take into account the expected inflation rate. So, for example, if the bank makes a loan at 5%, expecting the inflation rate to be 2%, the money that it gets back is actually just a 3% increase. But if it lends money at a 5% rate and the inflation rate is 7%, as it has been in the last year, it is actually getting back a negative 2% return on its money. So that's bad for banks. It actually is. It may be good for borrowers, but it's bad for banks. And so the focus of the Fed has been on inflation, but as it focuses on inflation, it makes things worse for unemployment. And so if the Fed does what it wants to do, which it's called a bias against inflation, it will slow down the economy. So yeah, the workings of ordinary people is not the main concern of the Fed. It's the interests of the financial institutions.
And taking that into account and shifting gears slightly, but I think along the same line of thinking, the race for shareholder profits has left workers in the dust. This is according to new research. A relentless focus on maximizing shareholder value has contributed to stagnant middle-class wages in the United States and fueled the rise of a society increasingly divided between haves and have-nots. This is according to a paper by the Roosevelt Institute. I know I've been saying for a number of years that the shift of focus to shareholder profit, maximizing shareholder value, has just decimated corporations in this country because they don't take the profit and reinvest that money back into the corporation or business, expanding the business, creating jobs. They take that money, they buy back stock, artificially inflate the value of the company so that the executives make more in their benefit and stock portfolio packages, and the shareholders gain more money and value.
Yes, I think the report is correct, but I think there's a part that's missing that, in fact, you've just gone over. It's not so much that corporations are trying to maximize shareholder value. Not all shareholders. Corporations have been trying to maximize the stock values of those who manage the corporations, the CEOs, and so forth, which leads to what we call a principal agent problem. Because